Mira woke before the palace did. That was the arrangement she had kept for 9 years. She woke first, before the cooks, before the stable hands, before the guards changed shifts on the eastern wall. She woke in the gray space between night and morning, when the sky was the color of old dishwater, and the birds had not yet decided what to do about it. She washed her face in the basin beside her small bed. She combed her hair back and pinned it flat. She tied the ribbon around her wrist, faded yellow, the width of 2 fingers, knotted with the particular half-hitch that her mother had shown her when she was 6 years old, and then she went to work. The eastern kennels were her responsibility. 12 wolves lived there, the king's working animals, trained for tracking and border patrol. They were ordinary wolves in the way that palace wolves were ordinary, well-fed, well cared for, obedient to command. None of them were particularly special. Mira liked them for exactly that reason. She filled the water troughs. She set out the morning meat. She checked each animal carefully, running her hands along their flanks, checking eyes and paws and coats. It was the kind of work that required nothing from her except her hands and her attention, and she gave both freely because it asked nothing more. The wolves accepted her. They did not look at her the way wolves sometimes looked at people, that deep, measuring look that went further than the surface. These wolves just took the meat and moved on. Good animals, straightforward animals. She was grateful for them every single day. The palace itself was a different matter. It was large and old, and full of people who watched things carefully. The king's court was not cruel, exactly. It was simply very thorough. It noticed things. It catalogued things. And Mira had spent 9 years ensuring that she was not a thing worth noticing. She wore the same gray uniform as the other maids. She kept her voice low and her answers short. She learned which corridors were busy at which hours, and used the other ones. She learned which council members lingered near the kitchens, and which guards asked questions, and she arranged her routes to avoid them. She was not hiding, exactly. She told herself that every morning when she tied the ribbon, she was simply being careful. There was a difference. She had been careful for so long that she had almost stopped remembering what it was she was being careful about. Almost. The wolf inside her was quiet on good days. On bad days, it pressed against the inside of her chest like a dog at a closed door. Patient, persistent, not angry, just waiting. She had learned to ignore it, the way you learn to ignore a sound that never fully stops. It became part of the background. She moved around it, worked around it, built her whole life in careful structures that did not disturb it and did not give it reason to push harder. It had been inside her since she was born. Half her blood was Fey, passed down through a mother who had loved a human man and stayed with him in defiance of her own people. The wolf had come from somewhere older than either of them, a bloodline that had been running through certain families for longer than anyone had written down. In most people, it expressed itself gently. A little extra instinct, a little extra awareness, a slightly sharper sense of smell. In Mira, it had come out as an entire second self. She had shifted for the first time when she was 16. It had terrified her. It had terrified the village she was from. After that, careful became the only way she knew how to be. She had come to the palace at 19. She had presented herself at the servants' gate with a letter of reference from a merchant in the lower town who did not know what she was and did not need to. She had said she was a hard worker. She was. She had said she was quiet. She was. The head housekeeper had looked her over once and told her to report to the kennels. Animals respond to quiet people, the housekeeper had said. Mira had agreed, and had not mentioned that the reason animals responded to her was somewhat more specific than the housekeeper imagined. The first year had been the hardest. Not because anyone had been unkind. The palace staff were, in the main, practical people who cared more about whether the work was done than about the person doing it, which suited Mira perfectly. It had been hard because the wolf inside her had been louder then, less settled, pressing against her with a frequency and urgency that made it difficult to maintain the careful distance she needed. She had spent that first year learning to hold the wolf at a consistent quiet, learning to feel its pressure without responding to it, learning to carry the weight of what she was, without letting it show in her face or her walk, or the way she moved through a room. By the second year she was better. By the fifth year she was very good. By the ninth year she was as close to genuinely invisible as a person can be, while still being present in a place. A functional ghost, thorough and reliable, noticed only when something needed doing, and forgotten the moment it was done. She had built this as a protection. She had kept it as a habit. The distinction between those two things was something she thought about sometimes in the quiet of the kennel mornings, when the 12 wolves were still drowsy from sleep, and the whole palace was in that gray, undecided state between night and day. Protection becomes habit, and habit becomes character, if you let it run long enough. She had let it run 9 years. She was not sure anymore where the protection ended and where she began. The ribbon helped, in its way. It was the one thing she allowed herself that was not functional, not careful, not arranged for the purpose of being unremarkable. It was simply hers, her mother's really. Her mother had worn it for 20 years before she pressed it into Mira's hands on the morning Mira left the village. It was faded by then, already softened by wear. Her mother's hands had been warm. The ribbon had been warm in them. Mira had tied it on her wrist on the road away from everything she had grown up in, and she had not taken it off since. That it glowed, faintly, with fey bondwork was something she knew and did not look at directly. Some things are better left at the edges of your attention. Some things, if you look at them squarely, require a response you are not prepared to give. She was 28 years old, and she was, by most measures, perfectly invisible. She considered this an achievement. The achievement had required maintenance, the way all achievements do. It was not something she had built once and left standing. It required daily attention, daily choices about where to stand, what to say, which face to show to which room. She had become skilled at it the way you become skilled at anything you practice every single day without exception. The skill had become instinct. The instinct had become, in some ways, her entire understanding of herself. She was the kennel keeper. She was the quiet one. She was the woman who knew the morning schedules and the feed records and which of the 12 wolves had a tendency to overeat if the portions were not measured carefully. She was the woman who had never given anyone a reason to look twice. On most days, she was perfectly content with this. On other days, usually the long afternoons in late summer, when the light came through the kennel yard at a particular angle and sat warm and golden on the stone walls, or the early mornings in spring, when the whole palace smelled of thaw and growing things and something that was not quite hope but was close to it. On those days, she was less content. On those days, the wolf inside her chest pressed its paw against her ribs, and she felt the full weight of 9 years. All at once, like a coat that had become too heavy to notice until suddenly it was moonlight. She always felt better by evening. The wolf always settled back. The coat always resumed its familiar weight, which was different from lightness, but was at least known. Known things were manageable. That was the working principle she had organized her life around. She was aware in the private and honest part of herself that she kept very separate from the careful part, that the working principle was flawed. She was aware that there was a difference between something being manageable and something being right. She was aware that she had chosen manageable over right 9 years ago and had spent 9 years not revisiting that choice. She was also aware, on the most private level of all, that the choice was still sitting there waiting for her. Choices did not expire. They simply waited, and sometimes the waiting made them larger, and sometimes it made them smaller, but it never made them go away. The ribbon on her wrist was warm, as it always was. She tied it back on every morning, without thinking about why. The king walked the kennels at midnight. She did not know this until the morning she found the lock re-secured from outside. The locks on the kennel doors were simple bolt mechanisms, the kind you could operate from either side. When Mira locked up for the night, she always slid the bolt from inside, then checked it from outside before she left. Every night, 9 years, the same routine. She knew exactly how that bolt looked when she had set it. She knew the particular angle it settled at, the slight leftward lean where the mechanism was worn. She found it set at a different angle, clean, precise, not the way she did it. Someone had opened the kennel after her. She stood in the doorway and looked at the bolt for a long moment. Then she went inside and checked all 12 animals, counted them, walked the full perimeter of the kennel, not quickly, but carefully, the way she ran all her checks. A hand to each flank, a look at each pair of eyes. All 12 were settled and unhurried, not disturbed in the slightest by whatever had passed through the kennel in the dark hours. She checked the feeding records on the board by the door. She checked the water levels and the condition of the floor straw. She examined the back corner where the drainage sometimes pooled in cold weather. Nothing had been moved. Nothing had been disturbed. The kennel was exactly as she had left it, except for the bolt. She went back out and checked the adjacent kennels. Checked those locks too. She checked the storage building and the equipment shed. She walked the fence line carefully, looking at the gate latch, looking at the hinges, looking at the ground for footprints. She found nothing useful. The ground was too packed and dry for impressions. She stood in the yard for a while, looking at nothing in particular. Then she went inside and told herself it was probably nothing, and went about her day. The next morning, the bolt was reset again. Same precise angle, same clean set. The wolf inside her chest pressed one careful paw against her ribs. She told it, firmly and without apology, to mind its own business. She found out the reason on a Thursday. She had not intended to be in the kennels after dark. She had come back because she had forgotten her cleaning cloth on the fence post, and she did not want it to be damp by morning. It was a small thing, a stupid thing, the kind of thing you forget and remember when you are halfway to your bed and then debate whether it is worth going back for. She had gone back for it. She was reaching for the cloth when she heard the footsteps, not the soft, irregular sound of patrol, even, measured, deliberate. Someone who knew exactly where they were going. She did not run. Running would make noise. She pressed herself against the outer wall of the kennel and stayed very still, and she watched through a gap in the wood slats as the king of the northern reaches walked through his own kennel yard at midnight like a man checking on something he had not told anyone about. Mira had seen the king before. 12 times, at various distances, in various corridors and courtyards. She had never looked directly at him. Looking directly at him was not something maids did, and it was not something she could afford to do, because the second you became the kind of maid who looked directly at the king was the second you became the kind of maid people remembered. She looked now through the gap in the wood. She could not help it. He was taller than she had registered from the corners of her awareness. He wore no crown, no formal coat, just dark trousers and a plain linen shirt with the sleeves pushed to his elbows. And he moved through the moonlit yard with the unhurried certainty of a man who owned everything in his immediate sight and had no need to demonstrate it. His face was turned away from her. She could see the line of his jaw, the set of his shoulders. He moved like something that had never once doubted its own right to exist. She disliked him immediately. She disliked him the way you dislike something that makes you aware, by contrast, of how carefully you have arranged your own smallness. He went to the kennel door. He checked the bolt. Yes, that was it. That was the angle. And he went inside. Mira waited. She should have left. She had her cloth. She should have walked away quietly and sorted out in the morning what this meant, and what, if anything, she needed to do about it. She was a practical woman. She was a careful woman. She stayed. She shifted her position slightly and found a better angle through the slats, and she watched. He moved through the kennels with the same deliberate calm. He checked each of the 12 wolves, quickly, efficiently. The same checks Mira ran every morning. He was not rough, and he was not sentimental. He simply looked at each animal carefully, and then moved to the next. He did not speak to them. The wolves did not crowd him or beg for attention. They acknowledged him the way working animals acknowledge their authority figure, with respectful stillness. He reached the end of the row and stopped. Mira's body went cold. At the far end of the last stall, where no animal had been that morning, where there had been clean straw and an empty water bowl and nothing else, there was now a wolf. It was enormous. It was silver white, the kind of color that looked like it had absorbed the moonlight and kept it. It was lying across the threshold of the stall, with its front paws extended and its great head resting on them, perfectly still, eyes half closed, like it had been there for years and had no plans to leave. Around its right foreleg, tied with a fey half-hitch, was a strip of faded yellow cloth, the exact width of 2 fingers, the same ribbon that Mira wore on her wrist. She pressed her back against the outer wall of the kennel and could not breathe. The king stood looking at the silver wolf for a long time. He did not touch it. He did not speak. He looked at it with the particular stillness he used for everything, the stillness that was a decision being made. And the wolf looked back at him from under its half-closed eyes, with an expression that Mira recognized because it lived in her own chest, and she had been arguing with it for 9 years. Recognition. Patient, certain, undeniable recognition. The wolf was not afraid of him. The wolf was waiting for him. After 11 minutes, she counted, because counting gave her something to do with the part of her mind that was not in free fall. The king turned and walked back out of the kennels, secured the bolt from outside, and left. Mira stood against the outer wall for another 5 minutes. Then she looked down at the ribbon on her wrist. Then she went back to her room and sat on the edge of her bed and did not sleep at all. Morning came the way it always did, without asking. She went to the kennels. The silver wolf was gone. The stall was empty. Clean straw undisturbed. Water bowl exactly where she had left it. The 12 ordinary wolves were in their usual places, eating their usual breakfast with their usual indifference to everything that was not food. Mira walked the full length of the kennel twice. She checked the back door, the side gate, the small vent at the end of the eastern wall. No evidence of entry, no evidence of departure. As if nothing had been there at all. She checked the locks again. She spent longer than necessary on the storage building. She was not stalling. A thorough person always checked all the locks. That was simply good practice. She went about her work. By afternoon she had almost convinced herself she had imagined it. By evening she was fairly certain she had not. By the time she was lying in her bed staring at the ceiling she was completely certain, because the wolf inside her chest had not pressed against her ribs once all day. It was not pushing, it was not waiting. It was sitting very quietly in the center of her, still and content, the way it had not been since she was a child. Like something had been resolved, like something had been found. She told it that nothing had been found, nothing had been resolved. She had seen a wolf in a stall at midnight, and the wolf had gone, and that was the whole of the matter. She told it this very firmly. The wolf inside her said nothing at all. It simply sat there, content, patient, infuriating. The summons arrived on a Wednesday. It came on official palace vellum, which was thicker than ordinary paper and had the king's seal pressed into the lower corner in dark red wax. Her name was written on the front, in the clean hand of the royal secretary. Inside, it said she was requested to attend the king's receiving chamber that afternoon, at the 3rd hour, on a matter related to the eastern kennels. Mira read it twice. She folded it and put it in her apron pocket. She went to check the water troughs. She was not avoiding the receiving chamber. She was maintaining the schedule. The wolves needed water at consistent times. The schedule was important. She checked the troughs very carefully. Then she checked them again. Then she smoothed her uniform, checked that her hair was properly pinned, checked that the ribbon was properly tied, and walked to the receiving chamber. It was a medium-sized room for a king's palace. Not the great hall, not the council room, just a practical space for practical conversations. Stone floors, a wide window that looked onto the northern courtyard, 2 chairs on either side of a plain wooden table. No throne, no ceremony. The king was standing at the window when she entered, which meant he heard the door and did not turn around immediately, which was either a sign that he was distracted or a sign that he was giving her a moment to compose herself. She used the moment. She stood at the correct distance from the table, hands clasped behind her back, so the ribbon on her wrist was not immediately visible, and waited. He turned around. She had seen him from a distance 12 times. She had seen him through a gap in kennel slats by moonlight. Neither of those had quite prepared her for him at close range in daylight, and she processed this information the way she processed all uncomfortable information, by noting it briefly and moving on. He was direct. That was the first thing. His eyes went to her face and stayed there, not performing assessment, just actually looking, the way very few people actually looked at anyone. "You are Mira," he said, "the kennel keeper." "Yes, my lord." "How long have you managed the eastern kennels?" 9 years, my lord." He said nothing for a moment. He was doing that stillness again, the deliberate kind. "I want to ask you about an animal," he said. She already knew. Of course she already knew. But her face stayed smooth, and her hands stayed clasped behind her back, and she said, with precisely the right amount of polite attention, "Of course, my lord. There was a wolf in your kennels, 2 nights ago. Silver white, larger than any of the animals you currently manage. I saw it myself." He paused. "It was gone by morning. I found no evidence of how it entered or left." "I see," Mira said. He looked at her. "Do you know anything about it?" Mira considered her options very carefully, in the space of one breath. She thought about the ribbon on her wrist. She thought about the wolf inside her chest, sitting calmly and contentedly in a way it had never sat before. She thought about 9 years of careful arrangements, of chosen corridors and lowered voices, of being the kind of person who faded so completely into the background that no one ever thought to look. She thought about the way he had gone down on one knee. She had not mentioned that part to herself yet. She was not ready. "The wolf is mine," she said. The words came out simply, without drama, in a voice that was her normal voice, and not any version of a confession. She said it the way you state a fact about the weather. "The wolf is mine." "It is. That is accurate." He was still. "Yours," he said. "Yes, my lord." He did not react the way she expected him to. She had imagined this conversation, or some version of it, 1,000 times over 9 years, in different rooms with different authorities, and in every version there was a specific sequence of expressions: surprise, calculation, and then the quiet, dangerous shift into management mode, where the authority figure began working out what you were and what that meant for their own arrangements. He just looked at her. "I would like to speak with your wolf directly," he said. Something moved in her chest. She felt the wolf pick up its head. "That is not possible," she said. "I have found," he said, very quietly, "that most things described as impossible are simply unattempted." She could not tell if he was correcting her or inviting her to prove him wrong. She stood in the clean light of the receiving room and felt the wolf inside her press gently, firmly, unmistakably forward, and she said, in the smallest voice she had used since she was 16, "Not here, my lord." He accepted this with a slight inclination of his head. "Then tell me when and where," he said. "I will be there." She looked at him for one full second, which was the longest she had looked at anyone in 9 years. "The Eastern Yard," she said, "after the 3rd bell tonight." She left before he could say anything further. She walked back through the correct corridors at the correct pace, and she did not check any locks on the way, and she was extremely aware that she had just made an appointment with the Alpha King of the Northern Reaches to introduce him to a wolf that lived inside her body, and that this was by every reasonable measure the most dangerous thing she had done since she walked through the palace gate 9 years ago. The wolf inside her was not worried at all. She found this deeply annoying. The Eastern Yard was a plain square of packed earth, between the kennel building and the outer wall, lit at night by 2 torches on iron brackets. It smelled of hay and dogs and stone. Mira arrived a few minutes before the 3rd bell and stood in the center of the yard with her arms at her sides and tried to feel nothing about any of this. The wolf inside her was sitting up now, alert and bright-eyed. She could feel it the way you feel a cat that has jumped onto your lap, warm, present, absolutely certain it belonged there. The bell rang from the North Tower. Once, twice, 3 times. He came through the gate a moment later. No guard, no attendant. Just himself, in the same dark clothes she had seen him in through the kennel slats, practical clothes for someone who moved through his own palace at night without announcement. He stopped a few feet away from her and waited. This was, she would think later, the thing that undid all her careful preparations. Not his authority, not his presence. The waiting. He stood there in the torchlit yard, and he was completely still and completely patient, and he did not demand anything from her, and he did not speak first, and he simply waited. She looked at him. He looked at her. The wolf inside her got to its feet. She had shifted 100 times over the years, mostly at night in isolated places. A clearing in the woods, the far end of the palace orchard in winter, once in a rainstorm on the road between 2 towns because she had no other choice. She had never done it in front of someone who knew what was happening. Every previous time had been alone or accidental or in conditions where the other party did not fully understand what they were seeing. She took a slow breath. She let her shoulders drop. She stopped holding the wolf back. It walked through her. That was the only way she had ever been able to describe it. In the privacy of her own mind. It walked through her, the way water moves through a cloth. All at once, completely, leaving the cloth behind. One moment she was standing in the yard. The next moment, the silver wolf was standing in the yard, and she was somewhere inside it, warm and quiet, looking out through different eyes at a torchlit courtyard. She could smell 6 times more clearly than she had 2 seconds ago. The king did not step back. He went down on one knee. Not in submission. She understood that in the first instant, the same way she would understand it if someone had said it aloud. It was not an act of lowering himself. It was an act of recognition, the specific, formal, ancient gesture that an alpha made when he encountered something that his authority could not govern and had no desire to. He went down on one knee and he looked at the silver wolf, and his expression was not the expression of a king encountering a problem. It was the expression of a man who has been looking for something for a very long time and has, against all his careful management of expectations, found it. The wolf walked forward. She would have stopped it if she could have. She would have held it back, pulled it away, turned them both around, and walked into the darkness, and never come back. She tried. The wolf was utterly uninterested in her objections. It walked forward across the packed earth of the eastern yard, and put its great silver head against the king's shoulder, and closed its eyes. He brought one hand up and rested it on the wolf's neck. Neither of them moved. Mira, from somewhere inside the silver wolf, felt something crack open in the center of her chest. Not break, not shatter, not collapse, just open, the way a window opens, the way a door that has been closed for a very long time opens when the right key finally turns. She did not want this. She had not asked for this. The anger came then, sweet and familiar, and she reached for it, the way you reach for a railing on an uneven step, not because you want it, but because you know it will hold you. The anger was an old friend. The anger asked nothing difficult of her. The anger was the simplest tool she owned. She pulled herself back. The shift was harder going the other direction, as it always was. It required more from her, more decision, more deliberate will. She stood in the torchlit yard in her gray maid's uniform, her hair slightly disheveled from the shift, the ribbon on her wrist intact as it always was, and she looked at the king, who was still on one knee in the dirt of the eastern yard looking up at her. She used the anger to keep her voice level. "You should stand up, my lord," she said. "The ground is cold." He stood. He was unhurried about it. He looked at her the same way he had looked at the wolf, fully, directly, without performance. "How long?" he said. She knew what he was asking. "How long have you been here?" Not in the palace. Here, within reach of him, within the boundaries of his authority, within the territory he governed. 9 years, she said. Something moved across his face. It was too fast to name properly. It was the kind of expression that appears and disappears in the space it takes to blink. And if you are not paying close attention, you miss it entirely. She was paying close attention. She had been paying close attention to everything for 9 years. It was not anger. It was not surprise. It was something quieter and more difficult than either of those. Something that sat behind the eyes, rather than in them. He looked at the ribbon on her wrist. He looked at the place in the yard where the silver wolf had stood. He looked back at her face. "Why a maid's ribbon?" he said. She had prepared for many questions. She had not prepared for that one. "It belonged to my mother," she said. She was a Fey bondswoman before she chose to leave her people. A bondswoman wore a ribbon as a mark of service. My mother kept hers after she was freed. When she gave it to me, she said that service is not a lesser thing. She said that the act of caring for something, tending it, sustaining it, keeping it whole, was not a small life. She paused. I wore it as a reminder of that, she said. And then I kept wearing it, because the wolf kept it, even when I tried to leave it off, even when I tried other ribbons, different colors, different cloth. The wolf wanted this one. She looked at the faded yellow cloth around her wrist. I stopped arguing about it eventually. The king listened to all of this without moving. When she was done, he was quiet for a moment. You said service is not a lesser thing, he said. My mother said it. And yet you chose service as a way to become invisible. She said nothing. He had not asked a question. He had stated something that was simply accurate, and she did not need to confirm accuracy. That was not what your mother meant, he said. No, she agreed. It was not. The silence stretched between them. It was not an uncomfortable silence. It had the quality of space, room for more than one person, room for words that had not been said yet, room for the things that were too large for the direct approach. She stood in it and felt the anger cooling slowly in her chest, and the wolf inside her sat in the warm space where the anger had been and said nothing at all. He looked at the ribbon again. The bond reader from the northern tower came to examine your wolf, he said. She went still. When? This morning, while you were checking the storage building locks. The smallest pause. You checked them twice. Her face stayed smooth. They are my responsibility. They are. He did not argue with this. The bond reader confirmed what I thought I was seeing. The ribbon is bond sealed. It cannot be removed by anyone outside the bond. And the bond? He stopped. She looked at him. He looked back at her. And for the first time she saw something in his face that was not certainty. It was not uncertainty exactly. It was more like the careful approach of someone who has spent a great deal of time managing his own expectations and is now standing in a situation where those expectations are no longer relevant. The bond, he said, was not formed recently. No, Mira said. It was not. How long ago? She thought about the night she was 19 years old, standing at the servants' gate with a letter of reference from a merchant who did not know what she was. She thought about walking through the gate into a palace she did not know, into territory that belonged to an alpha she had never met, and feeling the wolf inside her settle, just settle, instantly, completely, like a compass needle finding north. She had not understood it then. She had ignored it. She had built 9 years of careful life on top of the decision to ignore it. The night I arrived, she said quietly. He said nothing. The torches in their iron brackets burned steadily. Somewhere in the inner yard, a night bird moved through the darkness. The ordinary wolves in the kennel behind her shifted in their sleep. The king stood in the eastern yard, with his hands at his sides, and looked at her, and she stood looking back at him, and neither of them moved. The ribbon on her wrist was warm against her skin, as it always was. The wolf inside her sat very quietly at the center of her chest, and did not push and did not wait. It was already there. It had been there the whole time. She was not ready for what this meant. She was aware, with complete clarity, that she was not ready, and that the not readiness was not going to protect her from any of it, and that the 9 years she had spent making herself invisible had not actually made her invisible at all, had simply made the moment of being seen a great deal more abrupt than it might otherwise have been. She looked at the king. He looked at her. "I should go check the morning feed schedule," she said. "It is 11 at night," he said. "I prepare it the night before." He said nothing for a moment. Then, quietly, "Mira." It was the first time he had used her name without a title, without the formal distance of position. He said it the way you say the name of something you have been looking for. Simply, carefully. She felt it all the way through. "My lord," she said, very correctly. The corner of his mouth moved. It was not quite a smile. It was the expression of someone who is choosing, deliberately, not to press an advantage. "Go prepare your feed schedule," he said. She left. She walked across the eastern yard and through the kennel gate and along the correct corridor to the small supply room where the feed records were kept. And she sat at the small table in the supply room and looked at the feed schedule and did not change a single thing on it. She sat there for a long time. The wolf inside her was still quiet, still content, still utterly, frustratingly at peace. She told it, very firmly, that contentment was premature. The wolf was not listening. Things changed slowly after that, and they changed quickly, and both of those were true at the same time. The slow part was this. Nothing was announced. No official word came from the palace. No one pulled her aside to explain a new arrangement. She went to work in the mornings, as she always had, filled the troughs, checked the animals, maintained the schedule. She wore the same uniform. She wore the same ribbon. She took the same corridors. But the corridors were different now, in a way she could not quite explain. They were the same stone and the same width and the same pale morning light. But they had a different quality of space in them, as if the air had been rearranged slightly, as if something invisible had shifted and left the whole shape of the place a little different. She noticed this the way you notice a sound that has always been present suddenly stopping. Not the addition of something new, the subtraction of something old. The thing that had been subtracted was, she gradually understood, the particular tension of holding herself contracted. She had been holding herself contracted for 9 years. It was so habitual that she had stopped noticing it, the way you stop noticing the weight of a coat you wear every single day. The shoulders slightly drawn in, the voice slightly lowered, the eyes slightly cast down. The careful arrangement of the body in space that communicated at every moment, "I am not something that needs to be accounted for." She had not put that coat down. She had simply begun, very slightly, to let her shoulders fall back to their natural position. Over the weeks that followed, she became aware of other small changes. She answered questions in the council hallways with her full voice, rather than the reduced version she had used for years. She looked directly at the people she was speaking to, instead of at a point slightly to the left of them. She submitted her monthly kennel reports without agonizing over whether they were too long or called too much attention to what she had done well. She wrote them in her ordinary hand, at her ordinary length. No one seemed to find any of this remarkable. The palace absorbed these small changes the way it absorbed everything, completely, without comment, moving on. This was surprising, and then, gradually, not surprising at all. The world, she was learning, was not watching her as carefully as she had always assumed. She had built her caution against a threat that was mostly made of her own assumption. The real world was considerably more occupied with its own concerns. The quick part was the wolf. The wolf stopped being quiet. Not in a dramatic way, not in a way that disrupted the kennels or created problems she would need to manage. But the wolf stopped pressing its paw against her ribs and started simply being present, awake, attentive, alive, in a way it had not been in 9 years. She felt it the way you feel sunlight through a window that has been covered for a long time, incrementally, warmly, without asking permission. She did not like this. She found it manageable to not like it, which was not the same as being able to stop it. The king came to the eastern yard every night, not to see her, or not primarily. He came to the kennels at midnight, the way he had apparently always come to the kennels at midnight. And he walked the 12 animals and checked their conditions, and then he spent some time in the eastern yard. Sometimes the silver wolf was there when he arrived. Sometimes it was not. He did not appear to require it. He simply appeared in the yard and was present there, the way he was present everywhere, completely, without apology, without pretension. Sometimes Mira was there. Sometimes she was not. On the evenings when she was there, and they became more frequent because she found herself forgetting, increasingly, to be somewhere else. They stood in the torchlit yard and talked about the wolves, the 12 ordinary wolves, their training schedules, their medical histories, the particular behaviors and preferences of each animal. She knew these animals better than anyone in the palace. She had cared for them for 9 years. He asked questions, and she answered them without performing smallness, and he listened with the same complete attention he gave everything. There was the gray female, third from the left, who had a slight tendency to guard her food dish even when it was empty, a leftover behavior from a difficult first year before she came to the palace. Mira had been working with her for 2 years on it, and the behavior was diminishing but not gone. He listened to this with the same seriousness he would have given a border report. He asked what technique she used. She told him. He asked if it was working. She said, slowly. He said, most good things do. There was the black male with the damaged left shoulder, an old injury, pre-palace, that had healed imperfectly and gave him trouble in cold weather. She managed it with a particular routine of movement exercises in the early morning, before the real cold set in. He had not known about the shoulder injury. He went back through the intake records the next day, he told her, and found that it had been documented but never properly followed up. He thanked her for managing it. She said it was her job. He said it was beyond her job. She said it was still hers. They talked about the territory, the wolf populations in the wild lands to the north, which she had been observing from the kennel yard for 9 years, with nothing more than a careful eye and a record book. She had patterns no one in the official wildlife corps had charted, because she was in one place at consistent times and she paid attention. He was interested in the patterns in a way that was not polite interest. It was genuine, analytical, the same focused attention he gave the kennel animals. He asked questions that revealed he had been thinking about the Northern Territory for a long time, and her answers sometimes surprised him and sometimes confirmed things he had suspected, and both of those were equally useful to him. She began, very cautiously, to understand that being useful in her actual capacity was different from being useful as a small, unremarkable, forgettable cog in a large machine. Both involved contributing. One of them involved being present for the contribution. She had spent 9 years choosing the first. She was not certain, yet, that she was fully comfortable with the second. She was adjusting. He told her things, too. Measured things about the state of the outer territories, about a tension along the eastern border that had been building for 2 seasons, about the structural challenges of governing a large territory from a fixed central point. He did not speak to her about these things as if she were a courtier whose opinion he needed for political purposes. He spoke about them the way a person speaks when they are thinking aloud to someone whose intelligence they trust. It was a specific kind of trust. It was different from the official trust of position. She found it difficult to receive. She received it anyway. The bond reader from the northern tower came to find her on a morning in late autumn. She was a small, very old woman named Great, who wore pale linen regardless of the season, and moved through the palace hallways with the particular unhurried authority of someone who had been old for a very long time and had decided this was an advantage. She arrived at the kennel while Mira was cleaning the water troughs and simply stood at the gate until Mira noticed her. "You are the ribbon girl," Gretty said. "I am the kennel keeper," Mira said. "Yes, yes." Gretty waved a hand. "Come out here where I can see you properly." Mira came out of the kennel and stood in the morning light and submitted to being examined. Gretty walked around her once, which was an unusual thing for anyone to do, and which Mira accepted without comment, because there was no graceful alternative. "The ribbon has been bond-sealed for 9 years, Gretty said, stopping in front of her. "I know. The sealing happened at the point of territorial entry, first contact with the Alpha's territory. I know that too." Grady looked at her with very sharp eyes. "Then you know what you have been doing for 9 years. Mira was quiet. "You have been living inside a bond without acknowledging it." Grady said, "In all my years of reading bonds, I have seen this happen perhaps 4 times. It is not, strictly speaking, possible, and yet you have done it." She paused. "You are a stubborn creature." "I am a careful creature," Mira said. "Those are frequently the same thing." Greta tilted her head. "The wolf always knew." "Yes. And still you did not act." Mira thought about the servant's gate. 19 years old, with a merchant's letter and a ribbon on her wrist. The wolf settling in her chest like a compass needle. The specific decision she had made in the first hour of her first day. The decision to ignore what she felt, to build her life on the safer side of what was true. "I was afraid," she said. It was simpler than the whole of it, but it was accurate. Grete was quiet for a moment. "Of what?" she said. "Not of him." "No." Mira looked at the ribbon on her wrist. "Of being seen. Of being known. Of being the kind of thing that someone looks at directly and decides is." She stopped. "Is what?" Grady said. "Worth staying for," Mira said, very quietly. "Worth the difficulty." Grady made a small sound that was not quite a sigh, and not quite a laugh. "My dear girl," she said. The wolf wore the ribbon into his kennel. The wolf sat in front of the Alpha King of the Northern Reaches, and would not let any human hand remove what you put there. The wolf put its head on his shoulder and closed its eyes. She paused. "The wolf was never afraid of what you were worth." Mira said nothing. "The wolf," Greta continued, with the gentle firmness of someone who has been saying difficult, true things for a very long time, "has better sense than you." She left after that. She moved away through the morning courtyard in her pale linen, unhurried, and Mira stood at the kennel gate and watched her go, and felt the wolf inside her sit up very straight, with an expression that, if it had been a face, would have been deeply satisfied. "Do not," Mira told it, "say a word." The wolf said nothing. It did not need to. It had made its point through 9 years of patient waiting, and it knew it. And Mira knew it. And the particular quality of knowing that both of them shared in that moment in the kennel yard was not comfortable, and was not entirely unwelcome, and was, in the end, simply honest. She went back inside and finished cleaning the water troughs. She was very thorough about it. She cleaned each trough twice. What Greta had said settled in her through the afternoon, the way difficult truths settle. Not all at once, but in stages. Each stage a little clearer than the one before. You cannot bond with a stranger. The territory knew you. The wolf knew before your mind did. She had known. She had known from the first hour of the first day. She had walked through the palace gate at 19 years old, and felt the wolf inside her settle with a completeness she had never felt before. In any place, in any circumstances. She had felt it, and she had named it fear. Or rather, she had declined to name it at all, which was a different kind of fear. The kind that refuses to look at the thing directly in case the looking makes it real. She had kept it unnamed for 9 years. She had fed and watered and maintained the kennels of the man at the center of the bond she refused to acknowledge. She had been, in the most precise possible sense, caring for his animals while simultaneously avoiding the reality that he was, in every way that the old bloodlines understood these things, hers. Not in the way of possession, in the way of belonging, 2 directions at once, as bonds always were. She sat on the feed barrel at the end of the kennel row and looked at the ribbon on her wrist for a long time. Then she got up and went to find the king. This was, in its own way, the bravest thing she had ever done. Not because it required crossing dangerous ground or facing an uncertain outcome. She had faced uncertain outcomes before. It was brave because it was chosen. Not forced, not accidental, not necessary. She chose to go. She knew where he would be at this hour, the receiving room in the late morning, reviewing the week's reports from the council. She knew his schedule the way she knew the kennel schedule, because 9 years of careful attention to a place eventually means knowing all the rhythms of that place, including the rhythms of the person at its center. She knocked. "Come in," said the king's voice. She went in. He was at the table with a spread of papers, reading. He looked up when she entered and did not look surprised to see her, which she supposed was reasonable. Nothing she had shown him had given him much cause for surprise, because he processed everything with the same measured completeness. He simply looked at her. She stood at the correct distance from the table. Then, deliberately, she moved 2 steps closer. "I need to say something," she said. "Say it," he said. He set down the paper he had been holding. "I have been afraid," she said. "For 9 years I have been in this palace, inside this bond, and I have refused to acknowledge it because I was afraid of what it meant to be seen by you. Not afraid of you, of being seen." She paused. "I want to explain that, because I think you deserve to know why I ran instead of—" She stopped and started again. "Instead of being here." He was looking at her with that full, direct attention. "I also want you to know that the wolf was right, and I was wrong," she said. "The wolf always knew. It knew the first night. It wore the ribbon into your kennels, and it sat in front of you, and it put its head on your shoulder, because it was certain. And I was not certain because I was afraid, and I gave fear more authority than it deserved." She took a breath. "I am telling you this because I am tired of being afraid of being worth something. I have been tired of it for a long time." The room was quiet. The king stood up from his chair. He did this without urgency, without drama. He came around the table and stood in front of her, at a distance that was closer than polite and further than anything she needed to manage. And he looked at her the way he had looked at her in the eastern yard, fully, directly, without performance. "I have been walking your kennels at midnight for 3 years, he said. She blinked. 3 years. Since the first winter after I took the throne. I could not sleep. I walked. He paused. I was not looking for anything specific. I was simply present in the part of my territory that was—" He stopped, started again. "Calm," he said. "The eastern kennels were calm. The wolves there were calm. The yard was calm. I did not know why until 6 weeks ago. She thought about 9 years of filled troughs and checked locks and carefully maintained schedules. The calm of the eastern kennels was not an accident. She had made it. She had made it through 9 years of consistent, quiet, thorough care. I made it calm, she said. I know, he said. I know that now. She looked at the ribbon on her wrist. She looked back at him. It cannot be removed, she said. The bond reader confirmed it. I am not interested in removing it, he said. She looked at him. He looked at her. In the pale light of the receiving room, with the council papers spread on the table behind him, and the autumn courtyard visible through the window, and the ordinary noise of the palace moving around them on all sides, Mira felt the wolf inside her settle, not lie down, not go quiet, not retreat to the background where she had kept it for 9 years. Settle, like a living thing coming to rest in its own right place, fully present, not hidden, not managing itself into smallness. Present. What happens now? She said, not because she did not know, because she wanted to hear him say it. She had been guessing at the shapes of things through kennel slats and corridor corners for 9 years. She was done with the indirect angle. He looked at her for a long moment. Now, he said, you stop taking the back corridors. She felt something in her chest move, not crack open. It had already done that in the eastern yard. This was smaller and more specific. The careful settling of something that has been held at tension for a very long time, finally being allowed to release. They are faster, she said. The back corridors. They are longer, he said. You take them to avoid being seen. She could not argue with accuracy. She had made a rule about not doing it. The eastern kennels are still my responsibility, she said. Yes. I will not give them up. I have not asked you to. She looked at him. He was not smiling. He was not, in general, a person who did a great deal of visible smiling. But something in his face had a quality she had not seen there before. A quality of being, she thought, resolved. The same quality the wolf had. The same quality the ribbon had. Certain, patient, not going anywhere. She thought about the night at 19 years old, the servant's gate, the letter from the merchant, the ribbon tied on her wrist, the wolf settling inside her for the first time like a compass finding north. Instant, certain, wanting nothing from her except to be allowed to feel what it felt. She had said no to it for 9 years. She was very tired of saying no. All right, she said. It was small words for a large thing. She thought her mother would have understood that, would have understood that the large things are almost always said in small words, because the large ones do not need decoration, because they are large enough on their own. All right, she said again, more quietly. I will take the main corridors. He said nothing. He simply stood there in the light of the receiving room and looked at her the way he looked at everything, completely, without performance, without asking it to be other than what it was. She stood there and let him look. The wolf inside her sat in the warm center of her chest and said nothing at all. There are things that happen in a single moment, and things that happen across years, and most of the real things are both. Mira did not stop being careful. Careful was not a flaw to be corrected. Careful was a quality of attention that she had built into herself through years of practice, and it served her. It had always served her, better than carelessness would have. She was careful with the wolves. She was careful with the records. She was careful with the troughs and the schedules and the locks. She was careful about the king, too. She was careful with him in the way that you are careful with something important. Attentively, respectfully, with an awareness that care is what keeps valuable things intact. She stopped taking the back corridors. She did this for the first 2 weeks because she had said she would, and she kept her word because she was also that kind of person. Then she did it because she found, gradually, that the main corridors were not the danger she had imagined. The people in the palace were not, in general, looking to harm her. They were looking to do their own work, manage their own responsibilities, move through their own days. She passed the council members and the kitchen staff, and the guards, and the various officials and attendants, and most of them glanced at her and looked away, and some of them nodded, and none of them seemed to find her remarkable. She found this strange. She had been afraid for so long of being seen that she had not fully accounted for the possibility that being seen might simply be normal, that being present in a place might simply be what it was: present, unremarkable, ordinary. She had spent 9 years making herself invisible. As it turned out, the palace was full of people who had no particular interest in looking for her. She had been hiding from a threat that was mostly made of her own fear. The fear was not nothing. She wanted to be accurate about that. She had lived in a world that had real reasons for caution. She had been driven from her village at 16, had spent 3 years learning how to be alone with what she was, before she found her way to the palace. The fear had been reasonable once. It had served a purpose. It had kept her safe long enough to find a place where she could breathe. She was breathing now. The wolf in her chest walked openly, in a way it had not walked for years. She felt it when she moved through the palace, not aggressive, not dominant, not demonstrating itself, simply present, simply there. The way a living thing is simply present, when it is not required to fold itself into a smaller shape. She ran the kennels. She maintained the schedules. She submitted the monthly reports to the head of the royal household and stopped writing them in the smallest possible hand on the smallest possible page, as if trying to take up the least possible amount of official space. She took the main corridors. She talked to the other kennel keepers and the stable staff, and she found that they were mostly straightforward people who cared about the animals in their charge and had opinions about hay quality and winter vaccination schedules and the best way to manage a wolf with a tendency toward aggression in tight spaces. She had opinions about these things too. She shared them. This turned out to be, mostly, fine. She talked to Gret. The bond reader had a small set of rooms in the northern tower and an extensive collection of books about bond theory that she was happy to lend to anyone who was interested and could demonstrate responsible page handling habits. Mira was interested. She had spent 9 years living inside a bond she refused to understand, and she thought it was probably time to understand it. Grade A lent her books. Mira read them. She had questions. Grade A answered them with the particular pleasure of an expert encountering a genuinely curious student. The bond, as Mira came to understand it, was not a mechanism of control. It was a mechanism of recognition. It did not create feeling. It identified feeling that was already present. The ribbon had been sealed because Mira herself, on some level deeper than the careful layer she operated from, had recognized the bond the moment she entered his territory. The wolf had recognized it immediately. The careful layer had spent 9 years attempting to overrule the recognition. It had not succeeded. It had only delayed. "You cannot bond with a stranger," Greta told her one afternoon, over tea in the northern tower. "The mechanism requires something prior, some existing resonance, something that belongs together." "We had never met," Mira said. "Territory," Grady said. "Pack, line. The alpha and the territory are one thing. You entered the territory, and the territory knew you." She sipped her tea. "The wolf knew before your mind did. Wolves usually do. They are not burdened with as much reasoning. Mira thought about this. The wolf has better sense than me, she said. I told you that some time ago, Gretty said pleasantly. The king was in the eastern yard on the night of the first snowfall. Mira saw him from the kennel doorway, standing in the yard with his coat on for once, because it was genuinely cold, watching the snow come down in the light of the torches. The flakes were small and serious, the first real snow of the season, falling with the particular steadiness that meant it would settle by morning. He was not doing anything except standing there, watching it fall, in the specific way he had of being completely present in a moment, without needing to manage it or direct it or turn it into something more than it was. She stood for a moment watching him watch the snow. She thought about the first time she had seen him, through the kennel slats, 12 years of careful non-looking, finally ended by a gap in old wood and the moonlit certainty of a man checking on something nobody knew he came to check on. She thought about the receiving room and the way he had set down his paper without being asked to. She thought about the eastern yard, and the silver wolf, and a king going down on one knee in the dirt of an ordinary working yard, not performing anything, not asking anything in return. She went out. She stood beside him, and they both watched the snow fall in the torchlight, and neither of them spoke for a while, because neither of them needed to. The quiet between them had a different quality from the careful quiet she had maintained for 9 years. That quiet had been constructed, deliberately maintained, constantly checked, a managed absence of sound, designed to protect the distance between herself and everything that might see her clearly. This quiet was natural, the kind that two people who understand each other can sit in without either of them working to keep it intact. I have a question, she said. Ask it, he said. What did you think, she said carefully, when you first saw the wolf in the kennel? Before you knew what it was, before the bond reader, before any of it, what did you think in the first moment? He was quiet for a moment. The snow fell between them, catching the torchlight and going briefly golden before finding the ground. I thought it was the most certain thing I had ever seen, he said. It lay across the threshold like it was exactly where it was supposed to be. It was not nervous. It was not aggressive. It was simply there, in the middle of my kennel, with a ribbon tied around its leg, and it looked at me as if it knew me. He paused. I have ruled this territory for 9 years. I have dealt with uncertain things in that time, things that required management and interpretation and careful handling. That wolf required none of those things from me. It was simply certain. I had not encountered certainty of that quality before. You came back every night, she said. Yes, for 6 weeks. Yes, and you did not tell anyone. No, he looked at her. I did not know what to tell. She looked at the snow falling on the packed earth of the eastern yard. Small, even flakes covering the ground in their steady, quiet way. I wanted to keep it from you, she said. The wolf. For 9 years I had kept it, and I thought if I simply went on keeping it, if I stayed small enough, stayed below the kind of notice that requires a response, then the bond would simply remain as it was. A thing I carried privately, a thing that did not need to change anything. And the wolf, he said. The wolf disagreed, she said. The wolf disagreed very specifically, he said. There was something in his voice she was learning to recognize. It was not quite warmth, and not quite humor, but it was close to both of those things. It was the particular quality of a person who does not often let their amusement show, but occasionally allows it to be heard. It came to your kennel, she said. Yes. Wearing my ribbon. Yes. While I was asleep. That would appear to be the case, he said. She was quiet for a moment. The snow continued its steady, unhurried falling. I was furious about that, she said. I know, he said. It had no right. It had every right, he said, gently. It was carrying the bond. You were refusing to carry it. Something had to. He paused. It has better sense than you. She looked at him sharply. Great told me. She said the same thing to you, he said. I found it accurate. She looked at him for a moment longer. Then, despite everything, despite 9 years of careful distance and constructed quiet, and the very serious and well-grounded discipline she had built around not allowing moments to become larger than she could manage, she laughed. It was a small laugh, brief and genuine, the kind that arrives before you have the chance to decide about it. It lasted only a moment, but it was real. He was watching her when it was over. My lord, she said, looking away. Cade, he said. She had known his name for 9 years. She had kept it at a formal distance in her mind. My lord, the king, the alpha, all the titles that were accurate and were also useful for preventing a name from becoming the kind of thing you said to a person rather than about one. She had not once, in 9 years, let herself simply hold his name like a name. She held it now, simple and exact, and without any of the scaffolding she had built around it. Cade, she said. The name settled between them. The snow settled on the yard. An owl crossed somewhere in the darkness of the courtyard beyond the outer wall, silent and purposeful, on its own private business. The 12 ordinary wolves shifted in their sleep behind her, warm and undisturbed in their straw. Everything was ordinary, and nothing was ordinary, and Mira stood in the center of it and felt the wolf inside her sit in the warm open space of her chest, not pressing, not waiting, not holding itself back, just there, finally, completely, without apology. She reached up with her right hand and touched the ribbon on her left wrist. The faded yellow cloth was warm against her fingertips, as it always was, as it had been for 9 years of mornings and nights. She traced the half-hitch knot, the knot her mother had taught her when she was 6 years old, the knot the wolf had worn into a king's kennel, the knot that no power in the northern reaches had been able to untie or cut or burn or dissolve. My mother tied this knot, she said. She said the bondswoman's knot holds because both ends of it are equal. You cannot pull one side harder than the other. If you try, the whole thing tightens and locks and cannot be moved at all. It only works if both sides carry the same weight. He was looking at the ribbon on her wrist. She was describing something beyond a knot, he said. Yes, Mira said. I think she always was. The torches burned in their iron brackets. The snow fell, steady and patient, on everything it touched. In the morning it would cover the eastern yard in clean white, and the wolves would need feeding, and the troughs would need checking because the heating coils required adjustment in the first hard cold. There would be records to complete and schedules to maintain, and all the ordinary, necessary, deeply satisfying work of a life rooted in a particular place. She would do all of it. She would do all of it the way she always had, carefully, thoroughly, with full attention and without shortcuts. But she would do it with her shoulders at their natural position, and her eyes at their natural level, and her voice at its natural volume. She would do it as the person she was, rather than the careful reduction of herself she had worn like a second uniform. She would take the main corridors. Cade stood beside her in the falling snow, and did not speak, which was his way, and she stood beside him, and did not manufacture conversation to fill the silence, which was hers. They were two people who had learned patience from different sources. His from authority and its long view, hers from caution and its constant vigilance. And now they were learning that patience shared is a different thing entirely from patience endured alone. The eastern yard held them both in the particular quiet of a winter night in a palace that had always been his, and had always, quietly, always, been hers. The ribbon stayed tied. It always would. Not because it could not be removed, or rather, not only because of that, but because it was her mother's, because it was faded yellow and the width of 2 fingers and knotted with the half-hitch she had known since she was 6, because the wolf had worn it with certainty when she herself had none, because it was the one private thing she had allowed herself across 9 years of chosen invisibility, the single thread that had connected the person she was born as to the person she had built inside the palace walls, and had never let her completely lose track of who that first person was. The knot held because both ends of it were equal. She understood that now, because some things, when they find the place they belong, simply stay. The snow fell on the eastern kennels and the eastern yard and the whole of the northern reaches, steady and particular and without apology, as the first real winter of an unhidden life quietly began.